Strips are a great way to use up your cardstock scraps, but if you're looking for other ideas, this is the right place. Let's dive in. I'm going to make all of today's cards with the scraps left over from my last two videos. If you haven't seen them, I'll link them below, but I have some cardstock I colored myself with 6 different techniques from last week, as well as solid cardstock from 2 weeks ago. Just for fun, I'll throw in a couple metallic scraps, but spoiler alert, I only ended up using the gold, so I still have that scrap of holographic cardstock for other projects. The first idea is to cut small shapes with your scraps. I've got 1 layer of the 3-layer Amore cover plate set from Birch Design. Since I want them in different colors, I cut smaller pieces from my larger scraps and I taped them in place over the hearts. I ended up doing this twice, but a smarter way would have been to cut the pieces big enough to cover 2 hearts at once. Once I had my 10 hearts cut out, I used my second idea for non-strip scrap usage, and I used part of that gold scrap to cut my sentiment, a word die also from Birch Design. I used the mini art station and magnetic ruler to help me line up and space out my hearts, which I popped up with foam tape. This is my favorite way to use this tool because you can easily center the magnetic ruler and use the grid lines to be sure that it's straight on your card panel. I glued the sentiment on top of the hearts and I have a fresh and airy card that actually gives me kind of a Kate Spade vibe. My third idea is to use larger scraps for things like bookmarks or in this case a tag. I'm using the shipping tags die from Hutson, and its clever design lets you cut 4 tags at once from an A2 panel of cardstock. Since my scrap is much smaller and I don't have any more of it, I'll lower my chances of a die cutting accident by taping the scrap to the die. Idea number 4 is to use your scraps with alphabet dies. I cut my sentiment using Ellen's Tall and Skinny alphabet, 1 letter from each of my rainbow colors and then another one in pink. I'm using the station and ruler again, and normally I would place the center letter first and build out from there. But since there are 6 letters in my sentiment, I put 1 at the top and 1 at the bottom of the tag, and I built in toward the center, making sure to leave enough space there so that the words are clearly separated. I added a white tag to the back of this tag for a personalized handwritten message, and this is a fun addition to a gift. Idea 5 is layering flower dies. There's a bunch of these die sets around these days, and they are a perfect non-strip way to use up your little scraps. I used some of my hand-colored cardstock this time because the texture and color variations will add interest to the flowers, and I used them to cut the solid portions. This floral doodle set has narrow outlines for the top layers, and I cut them from white. And then I decided I didn't love the look of the white layer on top of the solid base, but I felt like I needed the outlines to give the flowers more definition, so I used them as little stencils on each of my flowers, blending more ink on top. This gave me the outlines without them being so stark. For my sentiment, I moved on to idea 6, stamping on a scrap. You could do this with an image stamp as well, but I needed a sentiment, and I needed some blue on this card. So I embossed a Lawn Fawn sentiment with white embossing powder onto the blue scrap, and I cut it out with the coordinating die. I added a sentiment strip with Mother's Day on it from the same Lawn Fawn sentiment set. Number 7 is an idea for stretching your small scraps. I started by using a die and cutting a rectangle from my sparkly green cardstock. I clearly didn't have enough to cut my Pinkfresh Studio sentiment from the leftovers, so I cut it right from the center of the rectangle. This trick works on any size of panel whenever you're going to add a layer on top of it, and it's a great way to conserve your specialty cardstocks like glitter cardstock. And when you've only got tiny little bits of your scraps left, you can use them for idea number 8 and fill in a cover plate die on a white-on-white background. I used this triangle die from Studio Light and I trimmed it down to fit on my square card front. I glued it down using liquid glue, and then as I did way back in the first card, I taped the little scraps to the die so that I could cut a few triangles from some of the colors. Then I simply put them in place with my jewel picker to create pops of color in a random pattern around my sentiment. Idea number 9 is to double die cut. I started by cutting a small circle of blue cardstock. Then I used the same die and a larger one to cut a green ring, then the outside die and the next one for the yellow ring, and so on. I cut a piece of printer paper from the largest circle die, I coated it with adhesive, and then I put the frames onto the white piece, working from the outside in, to create a rainbow circle of rings. When I got to the blue, I decided I wanted the more intense pink in the center, so I grabbed a smaller circle die and cut it from the blue circle and also from another scrap of pink cardstock. This is fun on its own, but I want to take it another step. I grabbed the large daisy die from a Jillian Vance design and I cut it from my target piece. This gave me a groovy looking flower, and if I had been more careful, I could have had a 2-for-1 with the negative space, but I ripped it. I added another gold die-cut word, and then I glued the daisy to my card so that the center was flat against the card and the petals were popped up for some dimension. And finally, idea number 10 was to use the scattered circles die and more of my gold scrap to cut out lots of various sized dots. These work really well as little embellishments that match my sentiment perfectly. I bet if you look in your stash, you'll find that you have dies that will cut little embellishments like this. I hope these ideas will help you to stop stripping. Well, of course, you don't have to stop. Stripping is fun when it comes to cardstock, but now you've got even more ideas for using up those scraps. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.